Um, I want to introduce Spencer Umney, and I may say that wrong, so you can correct me, Spencer, as well. But Spencer is from Santa Cruz County. He actually went to Harbor High School. And he knew pretty early on that he wanted to do a career in aviation. So he went to San Diego State University thinking of doing, I think, mechanical engineering. But he also then was also taking flying lessons at Watsonville Airport the summer after his freshman year. And so then he decided to stay in Santa Cruz and continue with the flying lessons and take classes at Cabrillo so that he could do both of the things he loved. And I think I will let Spencer tell the rest of his story from there. So welcome, Spencer.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Sure.
Definitely happy to be back talking to a Cabrillo class.
Great.
Yeah, so I knew from a pretty early age, I loved planes growing up. I think it had something to do with my cousins. Whenever they'd visit, they'd bring like a, flight simulator or toy plane to load onto the computer or, play with, because they were really big into model planes. So that was kind of instilled in me from a pretty early age, basically as long as I can remember, you know. So I grew up in Santa Cruz, lived in Watsonville and Santa Cruz basically my whole life up until moving to college. Um, so, you know, after, at the end of, when I was getting ready, at the end of my high school career, I was at Harbor. I applied to San Diego State and was lucky enough to be accepted into the aerospace engineering program. So I went there for a year. I didn't feel like it was a great fit. Not that it's not a good school, but it wasn't what I was looking for personally. But kind of the bigger issue was that summer I had started taking flying lessons at Airport because it's something I had always wanted to do. And I don't know if you guys know, but flying lessons are very expensive, and so is like a 4-year university. So I kind of had to make a choice whether I was going to go back to San Diego State or continue with the flying lessons. So because I knew I could go to Cabrillo and continue my college education while also continuing my flying. That's what I chose to do. Luckily, I was very fortunate that I could move back in with my mom, which not the best feeling. Once you go off to college, then I did have some doubts at that point, but it ended up working out pretty well at Cabrillo after 3 years at Cabrillo, kind of working part time at the boardwalk as well as at the Physics Learning Center. Um, just my last year at the Physics Learning Center um, and taking flying lessons. I transferred to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo to again major in aerospace engineering. So on the second time, it took, and I graduated in 2022, and since early 2023, I've been up here in the greater Seattle area, up in Everett, working at Boeing commercial airplanes.
Wow, very cool. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do at Boeing?
Yeah, so I'm an auto flight control laws engineer, so that's a bit of a mouthful. So the auto flight part is really just the autopilot. So my role is designing kind of how the autopilot thinks. So there's different modes. I put a couple images on the slide. Is it okay if I share those?
Please, we would love that. Thank you.
1 second. No, it's been a while since I've used Zoom.
Down at the bottom, there should be a little arrow. Okay, you got it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, well, there's just a couple of pictures. So this is actually after my first flight. in Watsonville with the plane, my first solo flight. So it's a very happy day. You can see I'm smiling quite a bit. Um,
Congratulations.
yeah, so this is kind of this is a part of the cockpit called the mode control panel, and it really controls the autopilot. So all these different buttons correspond to different functions. So as an example, this one here, I don't know if you can read that, but it says alt hold or altitude hold. So basically, when you press this, it'll tell the autopilot you want to keep the altitude you're currently at, and it'll hold that altitude. But so that's kind of the autopilot part. The control laws part is when you tell the autopilot to hold an altitude, keeping with the same example, um, it needs to know how much to move the control surfaces of the airplane. So that's at the tail, it's kind of a cruciform tail that, um, and the airflow over those surfaces is how you control the pitch of the airplane, which is primarily what would be used in the altitude hold. So the control law part kind of is designing how the airplane takes what you want to do with the autopilot, say hold an altitude, and turns that into a physical motion of of the control surfaces on the aircraft in order to kind of get your desired outcome. In this case, holding an altitude without moving too much.
Mhm.
So there's more modes. There's heading, so that's your lateral direction. If you're going north, south, that sort of thing. The autopilot can control that. It can climb and descend. It can control speed, and kind of excitingly, it can land the plane all by itself, which is used when there's poor weather at an airport to fly a more precise approach because you can't see the runway. You can actually have the autopilot fly all the way down to the ground and land the airplane and control basically the heading so that you don't deviate to the left or right of the runway. Um, so it's pretty complex, but a lot
Are
of
these
fun.
are these features already on the planes or are these in development?
Yeah, so the team I work on is, you know, we kind of call ourselves a legacy auto flight. So you guys, probably many of you are familiar with Boeing. Maybe you've probably heard the name before. But Boeing has a lot of different aircraft models. Primarily, the one I work on is the Boeing 737.
Mhm.
So if you've ever flown on Southwest Airlines or Alaska Airlines, they are they only operate 737s, which is kind of a smaller Boeing model. Um, so you've flown on one. And the 737 has been around for a long time in some shape or form since the late 1960s. But it's been upgraded and updated throughout that time. So what I'm working on now is the newest version of the software that's going to go on the autopilot. So it's not a totally new product. It's really developing and making improvements on software, the
Mhm.
autopilot software, which already exists.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah. And I guess just another thing. Here's a picture. I don't know if you guys can see that.
Wow.
I'll zoom in. So this is the cockpit of a 737. This is actually a flight test aircraft. I'm not sure why it was on the internet. Somebody took a picture of it. So it's yeah,
And is
it's
that you on the right with the
yeah.
737?
Yeah, probably the most exciting part of my job that I get to do um, is flight testing. So this is me here back when I had a mustache, which was just a couple months ago. This was in December, and this is the new experimental. You can kind of see up here it says experimental.
Hmm.
Yeah, they have to say that because it's not certified yet. The 737 Max 10. So we were out doing flight testing, and this was Sacramento. In this case, we're kind of looking for some crosswinds because you do need the you basically need to test the system in all sorts of different weather conditions.
And are you
Um,
flying it?
oh
You
no, no. they don't let me fly it. I have flown the simulators, but to fly a big plane like this, you need a lot more experience than I have.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. But what we're doing is basically we're sitting in the back and we have all sorts of like computer equipment and we're looking at data as it comes in, looking at the performance to make sure that whatever condition we're flying, so maybe that's a landing with specific crosswinds or simulating an engine failure, making sure that the airplane performs kind of within what we've specified as the acceptable range. So I will mention this day, we were down in Sacramento. You see it's pretty cloudy, pretty gray. It was raining and quite windy. This was actually the day that there was a tornado in Scotts Valley. So it was a very windy day, very bumpy ride, but lots of fun. So that's probably the highlight of my short time at Boeing so far.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that. Would you be willing to talk about your experience at Cabrillo and Cal Poly eventually? And,
Yeah,
the students here are kind of going through that right now.
yeah. So I really, I'll echo what Aaron said, and that the teachers, the professors at Cabrillo are very good. I found, I would say, equal to the people at Cal Poly. And in some ways better because it's Cal Poly has smaller class sizes, but Cabrillo you could really get one-on-one help or kind of interact more with the professors. I know that's not the case at some larger schools like UCs and stuff. Um, so I, I took 3 years at Cabrillo, kind of like Aaron. Um, I took my time at the beginning. I didn't take kind of when I was going back, I kind of eased into it because I wasn't quite sure it was going to work out.
Hmm.
At that point, I was thinking I would try to get my commercial pilot's license,
Mm.
but funds kind of ran out. um,
Are you still thinking you might do that
I,
someday?
I think I will. Boeing has a cool program called the Learn Together program, where they won't pay for your pilot's license directly, or if you already have it, they won't pay for when you get additional basically qualifications, but they will give you a bonus when you get them, which almost offsets everything. So it's pretty significant for commercial. I think it's like $15,000 or something, which is probably about what the license costs. So
That's pretty
um,
cool.
the, the
Yeah.
main the main um, the main barrier is time, time and commitment.
Yeah, I think someone had asked Aaron, but we didn't get to it, is like, what the typical workload was, and he said about 45 hours a week, I think. What's it like for you at Boeing?
I would say that's probably typical for me. It's a little bit different at Boeing. I think most of the engineers, I think all of them in Washington, are unionized. So they basically we have to get paid for overtime.
Mm.
And because of that, for a while they were saying no overtime is approved. So that was kind of nice because then you
Mm.
only work 40 hours a week. But we're in the midst of a certification program, which is pretty long um, and has been delayed a couple times. So now the push is really to finish it. So overtime is being authorized.
Oh,
Um,
so you could find yourself working a little bit longer. Not that you aren't
yeah,
paid for it, but
eh,
it cuts into your personal time.
yeah. But I really enjoy what I do. Like for example, some of the flight testing days, 14-hour days maybe.
Yeah.
If because you get there early, you brief, and then you're flying somewhere far away, maybe so that's a couple hours, and then you come back. But it's mostly pretty fun. Um,
Cool. That's
yeah.
great.
But I guess back to my Cal Poly experience. Um, I, I transferred again for aerospace, like I said. I will say that also took 3 years
Mhm.
um, because the articulation. at the time was kind of such that because there was some weird stuff with Cal Poly being on the quarter system and certain classes only being offered in certain quarters, that the transfer path for the aerospace engineering major was actually almost impossible to do in 2 years. You had to basically do it in three.
Hmm.
So that's one thing to consider when when everyone here is transferring. Um,
That's really good advice. Thank you.
yeah.
Was there anything at Cal Poly that you'd or at Cabrillo that you'd highly recommend these students do?
Um, I wasn't involved in a ton of kind of the extracurricular stuff at Cabrillo. Probably the thing that helped me most, and I got the most out of at Cabrillo was spending time in the physics learning center.
Mhm.
Even before I was a tutor there, I would do a lot of like my homework there, working with a group through the physics. Remember a lot of struggles in some of the classes with is Marcus Watson and Carlos Figueroa still there?
Carlos is for sure. He teaches classes for engineering and physics. Don't know the name Marcus, but I haven't been there very long, so yeah.
Okay, yeah. Tough classes for sure. And so I really got a lot out of having that space available and being able to go like work on homework with people, who were doing the same problems as me and kind of sharing knowledge that way. I would
Yeah.
definitely recommend it for the
So you're
Physics Learning
saying the
Center.
Physics Learning Center. Did you ever go to the STEM Center too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Kind of all the different centers.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
So these are good study spaces, you're saying, and you can
yeah.
collaborate with other folks in there.
Yeah.
Someone else has, do you have any advice for someone interested in a career in aerospace?
Um, hmm, I mean, I think there's multiple paths you could take. Like Aaron was saying, he was a mechanical engineer, which is more generalized, but he's working in aerospace too. I work with people who have majors kind of spanning a whole range of things. We got, mechanical, electrical, and also kind of other stuff like human factors engineering, which is really people who study how human interactions with the engineering or the engineered systems, so in this case the plane, how pilots interact with that. So they come from sometimes even psychology backgrounds. So there's a lot of paths into it. I would say the biggest piece of advice I could give is don't get discouraged. Um, it took me probably like 6 months of just straight applying to even get an interview, which
Oh,
was
really?
well, I kind of left it late, I think. Um, but I should have been sending out applications earlier in my senior year. Um,
Okay.
and before that, I took 7 years to get a bachelor's degree. Um, and at a certain point, I was wondering, is this worth it? Um, well, I would say there is light at the end of the tunnel. And in some ways, I think perseverance will serve you more than, just being smart. I've failed classes before. Again, kind of echoing Aaron's sentiment. I struggled with the differential equation class. Actually, I discontinued, I think, or I dropped it the first time I took it because I had some other like familial responsibilities, taking care of a parent that I had to do, um, and I was not doing well in that class, so I had to retake it. But you know, don't give up hope. I guess is my advice.
Yeah, and sometimes, life has to be a priority over school. So that's okay. It's okay. I had asked Erin this, and I'll ask you too. How do you feel your engineering degree has impacted your life or your quality of?
Um, yeah, so and echoing his sentiments. Engineering is a pretty well paid field. I think especially aerospace engineering tends to be pretty highly paid. So it's given me the opportunity to do. more of the hobbies that I enjoy. I guess you might be able to see the guitar neck behind me.
Mhm.
You know, I can afford nicer guitars. I can go flying, which is a big one for me. Um, the other part I would say that I've benefited from is you meet some really, I would say, extraordinary people. I've been lucky enough to meet some really very like amazing people in aerospace throughout my college career, and now at Boeing. For example, like at Cal Poly, um, I was working on an extracurricular project, which was to make a remote controlled solar powered aircraft, which could fly for 24 hours once the batteries were charged at the beginning of the day, and then it kind of charged throughout the day, and then hopefully would have enough to keep flying during the night. So I was working at the hangar we had there on the airport, kind of doing a carbon fiber mold. And Victor Glover, who was a NASA astronaut and also Cal Poly alum, had been touring the school, and he was toured the hangar, and we got to have like an hour long conversation with him. And I was like, man, this is awesome.
That is so cool. Were you was that a club you were a part of or a class?
Yeah, that was a club. I'm
Okay.
not sure if it's still active. It may be,
Mhm.
but it was like a club.
I'm
Um,
sure it helped you get your position, in addition to you being a pilot, of course.
it,
You seem a
it,
natural fit for Boeing with your background.
yeah, I mean, it definitely helps to love airplanes, and especially for the autopilot, um, because so much of kind of the autopilot design and what we do is kind of, I guess, related, or it's very close to the pilots. So the pilots are interacting directly with the autopilot. I found it extremely useful to have my kind of pilot background, so I understand kind of the national airspace system, different phases of flight, and kind of generalities like that. Not that I would claim to be qualified to fly a jet.
Um, I think we're at the end of our time. I'll let anyone ask a question if they do, if they have one, maybe put it in the chat or unmute. And maybe you could leave us also with a thought of, do you have any suggestions for these students here on their educational path or career?
Um, I I think there have been a lot of times where you know I've had to do something I didn't love, um, to get to a point in my life where I can do something that I love. Um, like my final summer from Cal Poly, like that was like COVID, I
Yeah.
think. So it was really tough to get an internship. So I worked as a dishwasher. Um, but sometimes, yeah, you kind of have to suffer through, um, experiences that might not seem related. But I think it can benefit you. Not necessarily will, but can benefit you in the long run. And even in my current job, I still have things that I don't enjoy doing,
Mhm.
like documentation or going back through 40 years of engineering, trying to figure out why something was done a certain way back, maybe in 2000 or something. That's tough.
Yeah, it's tough, but I think you make a good point. Sometimes we have to do the things we don't love so that we can keep doing the things we love. So that's really good advice. Thank you, Spencer. Well, thank you for being here.